Because I saw Wicked Part 2, I have been changed for good. Let's talk about it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're here to discuss Wicked for Good. But before we get into that, Daniel, do you want to give the people a movie recommendation?
I don't really believe in guilty pleasures, but if I had a guilty pleasure, it would be Rapture-Palooza. Have you seen that one?
Never heard of it, but go ahead. It sounds crazy already.
So, Rapture-Palooza is a 2013 comedy movie about a couple of people who have survived the rapture, and they are now left behind in the post-apocalyptic world that's ruled by the Antichrist. It basically follows their adventures as they kind of have to deal with the beast, which is the name of the Antichrist, who's basically treating the world as his personal playground. And they kind of have to deal with him and the troubles of kind of making it in the post-apocalyptic world. It's a very silly, high-concept comedy. It's got 25% on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm just saying it deserves at least 30. It's just a fun, light watch. Like just as an example, one of the effects of the rapture is that there are these ravens or these birds all over the place who just keep swearing at people, and they're just there the entire movie, and they just keep sitting on a roof or like on a car or something like that, and they just antagonize people, and that's all they do the entire movie. So that's kind of the kind of humor that's in this. It's very much an early 2010s comedy. It's very silly, and it's a lot of fun. So if you just want to relax for 2 hours with some light blasphemy, Rapture-Palooza absolutely does the trick.
No, for sure. Sounds like a lot of damn fun, which I'm not opposed to, actually. I do like, some silly, goofy, wacky comedies. So, yeah, sounds interesting, for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things I look for in movies is when it just has an idea and just does something fun with it. And this absolutely does that because it takes a bunch of the tropes of, what people imagine the rapture would be, and it just plays them straight, and they just happen, and it's just very very matter of fact. Like the meteors falling from the sky just becomes normal after a few weeks of crisis. You just deal with it, move on with your life, and it's kind of the spirit and ethos of the movie. And it just takes those ideas completely seriously and place them straight, and just what if you had to live in that kind of world. So I like it whenever a movie has a silly idea and then just does a few things with it, and this absolutely does.
Fair, fair. Well, my recommendation, and one that the boys talked about last week, but I didn't quite make the episode because I didn't quite get to watch it, is The Running Man. I wouldn't say it's my a massive recommendation. It's kind of the only thing that I watched in the past week, and I think for the most part, for like the first half or so of the movie, I thought it was like a really well done movie. I thought, it was really interesting, really good kind of character motivations, really kind of interesting world that they set up in the movie. The second half gets a little bit weird, and it kind of goes in a direction that I don't think it needed to go in. It just became a little bit less enjoyable in the second half of the movie. But I think overall, as a movie, I think it's quite good fun at the cinema. It's somewhat sort of interesting. Nothing too crazy, but nothing offensive as well. So it's kind of, during the Christmas period, while you've got a little bit of time to kind of spare with the family, it's an easy movie to go watch in the cinema, I would say. And I actually don't know how you guys feel about it, you and Jonathan, because I didn't quite catch the review. But I don't know. I had a decent enough time with the movie.
Yeah, I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. So I was basically expecting Mickey 17 and got something much better. With especially dystopian science fiction, it's just so full of cliches and just has no connection to the real world in many cases. And this one kind of did. In our review, we kind of talked about how it kind of predicted reality TV of the 2000s. So it's a novel from the 80s predicting reality TV from the 2000s, and then in 2025 they made a movie about that, which is kind of one of the weirder parts of that movie because it kind of feels retro in two different ways because it calls back to two different decades that have long since passed. But then it also puts in things about brain rot and the like social media and AIs and all of that wasn't in the original story, and it manages to kind of partially update it. I think it's a totally solid movie. I think Edgar Wright makes nice looking movies, even if this is definitely no Hot Fuzz and no Shaun of the Dead, but it's absolutely a competently made movie. And I'm so surprised that it's just bombing so much. Like it's just people are just ignoring it, and I think it absolutely deserves more attention than it's gotten.
Yeah, I did see that it was doing quite bad, and I don't think. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's that bad that people should be ignoring it. There's definitely worse movies that have made much more money at the box office, and this one definitely deserves. a little bit more like time in the sun.
Absolutely.
But yeah, moving on. Main event. Wicked for Good. Dan, do you want to give us a synopsis of the movie?
All right, Wicked for Good is the second part of Wicked, which is the adaptation of the stage musical based on a novel. After the events of the first part, it picks up with Elphaba, who has become the Wicked Witch of the West. She's gone into exile and she's fighting the troops of the Wizard of Oz, who is kind of building the Oz that we know from the original story. We've got Glinda, who has kind of become a figurehead for his regime. There's Fiero, who has kind of become the commander of the police force, of the guards. The story essentially comes to a showdown as these collide in their attempts to do the right thing. Elphaba tries to stop the wizard, and Fiero and Glinda try to live with the choices they made in the first part and end up having to oppose her. And the story escalates from there as those three come to a head. So what did we think of Wicked for Good?
I was so confused for a lot of this movie as to what on earth was going on. That's not because I didn't remember the first movie, it's not because of any of that. It was mainly because the way that the story was told, and I think the way that the story played out, I was like really confused as to what the actual like plot of it was and like what was important. And it kind of felt like it was more set up for the Wizard of Oz stuff, for like, you know, these are things that you know from the Wizard of Oz and these are how things came to be, as opposed to really having like a strong compelling narrative that really drove the entire of the second movie completely. Unless I was missing something, and I don't know. I was sat there and I'm like, am I missing something? But I was just like, it doesn't really feel like a movie, like a story. It feels like it's just a bunch of like connected scenes. That's not really telling a story or a narrative. Whereas like I felt like in the first movie, I completely understood what they were going for, completely understood what they were setting up. I thought it had like a lot more charm as well than what this second movie had. Didn't really care for the music in this one at all. Where I thought, you know, the first one had kind of better musical set pieces and better musical setup. This one, I don't know, it just kind of fell flat on me, especially when it wanted you to be emotional. So I was just confused. I was like, I'm not connected to the story in any type of way to feel any type of emotions for anything that was going on. And it could be that I just missed the point of it. But even stuff like, you know, stuff to do with the animals, it was kind of loosely touched on in the first movie. And I don't feel like it was really carried on in the second movie in a really meaningful way that kind of went anywhere or said anything or anything like that. I don't know. It was just kind of left scratching my head as to what I was watching.
Yeah, I think we're broadly in agreement. So a year ago, we reviewed Wicked Part 1, and there we went completely blind into it. We had not seen Wizard of Oz. None of us, I think, knew the musical, so this was just a completely fresh story for us. And back then, I took massive issue. Like, that one turned into a light-hearted 1 hour debate about how to treat racism in fiction. My problem, like the reason I bounced off so hard of Part 1, had a lot to do with that, where the prejudice that Elphaba experienced and the persecution of the talking animals, I thought was completely unjustified. It did not fit the world we were seeing, and characters were not acting in believable or interesting ways. I thought it was all very childlike and simplistic, and none of it really grabbed me, and none of it really rang true to me. And back then we said, okay, maybe that will come together in part two. Maybe once you take part one and part two together, maybe it will all make a little bit more sense. And I'm here to tell you, I told you so. In programming, there's this thing called technical debt, right? Where shortcuts you take early on in a project end up causing problems or creating more work for you towards the end of the project. And so you end up doing more work overall. And this is technical debt, the movie, where the mistakes they made in the first part are completely dragging down the second part, and there's neither time nor really intention to fix that, right? So specifically, when the wizard says, if we kill the Wicked Witch, I will no longer have to blame the animals. And I'm sitting there in the theater shouting, blame them for what? You've not shown us what his plan is. You've not shown us what his motive is. You've not shown us what people believe about the animals, about the wizard, or about Oz. None of it makes sense. And it's all very cartoonish. It's all very simplistic. And that really undermines all the emotional payoffs that are supposed to come in the second half. It really undermines all of the character moments that are meant, like the betrayals and the choices. And I can kind of see what it's meant to be. Like, I'm supposed to feel for Glinda and I'm supposed to feel for Fiero. And I just don't, because none of it feels like a real conflict. And I do think taking parts 1 and 2 together, they stayed way too close to the musical, which by itself is already very simplistic in how it tells the story. But in a musical there are shortcuts you have to take, right? Just out of practical necessity. And in a movie you can add more. And they just didn't. And as a result, the story didn't really work for me at all. I think it also, especially, and like you mentioned that you touched on this, specifically in the final act, it spends a lot of time just establishing things up that we know from Wizard of Oz so that we get to the status quo. And this is maybe more like the end of the second act or something, but at some point in the story, there's a lot of time spent on explaining how the Tin Woodsman became the Tin Woodsman, the Scarecrow became the Scarecrow, and all of that. And none of it is interesting, none of it makes sense, and all of it outright contradicts the movie, both the movie and the book, just in terms of who the Tin Man is, in terms of who the Scarecrow is. And so you're doing all this prequel nonsense, and it does, like, the whole appeal of a prequel is that it ends up fitting together as you watch the, like, things that you know from the original are given additional significance or background in the prequel. And that is kind of one of the problems of prequels, that they spend too much time on that sort of thing. And here they spend this time not just on showing this but on retconning it, so that it just becomes something completely different, right? So Fiyero becoming the Scarecrow, for instance, does not fit together with the original story at all. So like the whole thing is just really ill-advised, and I was already not on board with it, but I was kind of willing to meet it halfway, and then the movie just ran off in a random direction. I think I enjoyed this one a little bit more than the first part, but mostly because now we know the characters and now we know what's going on, and now we're seeing kind of the conclusion to it. And we spent very little time just setting stuff up, which was a source of a lot of the problems I had with part one. And this is not the problem in part two, right? The point is, I enjoyed it a little bit more than part one, but overall, I don't think it hangs together. I think it's a really shoddily told story. And now that we know how it all ends, all the time that's wasted in the first part is even more egregious. And so overall, I'm just not feeling it. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I was waiting for that. I mean, I don't know why I'm kind of opposite in terms of I liked part one a little bit more than part two. And for me, a lot of the story issues came in part two because this is where they were meant to kind of convince us why she was kind of cruel or why she became cruel to Dorothy in this particular movie. And this is kind of where you're meant to be setting up all the different kind of conflicts and like the changes in the character. Like there has to be a reason why Elphaba becomes the Wicked Witch for a period of time that we see in this particular movie. And I don't feel like any of that was really set up, and like the change in her character really felt earned or felt sort of deserved in this. And I felt like they wasted too much time kind of on the wrong things, and there was too much time setting up the status quo, setting up what we know, and not enough time showing us that conflict with the Wizard of Oz. She's out here trying to do, or she was meant to be out here trying to do all these good things but failing. But I don't know, you just don't really feel the impact of it. I don't know, there's just like something missing in a character change where I can't quite put my finger on it, on what it is, but I just didn't buy into it and I didn't believe it. And because I didn't believe it, I didn't care.
There's a lot of convoluted stuff here about just the exact steps that Glinda and Fiyero and Elphaba take, right? And they kind of pull a Dark Knight in the end, where kind of the people need a villain and they need to know that good triumphs over evil. And so Glinda, who has been awful the entire two movies, pretends to be good. And Elphaba, who has been good the entire time, pretends to be evil, so that they can sell kind of the people of Oz a story they can buy into. And what this all amounts to is that the most spoiled, selfish, insufferable, vapid character in the entire story, and the most privileged as well, ends up being Queen of Oz and ends up being celebrated by the people as their savior, when really she's been at least a villain and also just a horrible person the entire movie. And the only thing she's going for her is that she's pretty and popular.
And funny.
She's not funny because she's so witty. She's funny because she talks funny. You know what I mean? But like, her tragedy is that she gets to be queen and popular and celebrated by everybody. What kind of moral is this?
Yeah, I kind of half saw what they were trying to do with that, with the flashback that they had with her as a kid in terms of, and I kind of do agree with you. It's kind of what kind of morals are we trying to sort of set by this, but it would have been better or greater if she kind of rejected the idea of like, just having the status placed upon her just because of like who she is and what she was, and kind of people celebrating and believing in her based on a lie and based not really based on who you are. So it's kind of almost like sending the wrong
Yeah.
message of like, kind of pretend to be this person and everyone will celebrate you, really.
And throughout the entire story, part one and two, it's this whole idea of how you look is how you get judged. Like Elphaba is ugly according to the story, and that means she's viewed as evil and she's viewed as an outsider. And Glinda is pretty, therefore she is celebrated, right? And I kind of get this whole idea of like people are so stupid that we have to lie to them for their own good. And that means Glinda has to take this burden on her, and the ugly people, Fiero and Elphaba, have to go into exile, have to disappear, because the people have to believe that they've died. And it's like I kind of get that it's not saying that Glinda being queen in the end is good exactly. It's more like saying, look how stupid everybody else is that this has to happen. And that by itself leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Just how arrogant like the whole feeling of the story is. Because I think that is how like the target audience looks at this. Like we are the ones who see through this through appearances, but everybody else is so stupid that there is no alternative to having the pretty people win, or at least tell the story that the good people won, like the pretty people won. I just sat there watching Glinda go through kind of the sequence in the end where she kind of puts on the crown and she reflects on everything that's happened, and there's some kind of communion between her and Elphaba as well, right? Where both kind of see this is tragic, but it has to be this way, and now things are the way they're supposed to. But it ends up with Elphaba walking into the desert and Glinda being in her palace, ruling over everybody. It just felt creepy and it weirded me out. And I understand it was not just supposed to be a happy ending, but it didn't make me uncomfortable because of what it was saying. It was more about this entire thing feels weird.
I mean, you're one to famously not like a happy ending.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of have like less strong feelings about the ending, more so because I think I was just like not invested in it. But on the point about like the people, as I was like kind of watching it and as I was like seeing it, I was kind of like relating it to real life and how the government and people in control kind of have to like lie to people or like sell a narrative and sell a story for people to believe in, because otherwise there'd be like mass hysteria, mass panic, or like people, I don't know, it's almost like the idea of like people are too kind of like stupid to kind of know the truth, and you have to like manage whatever sort of information you kind of present to them. So on the idea, I kind of made sense as to why they had that approach in that movie.
I think it's less like the actual ending itself and more the mentality that's shown through. I can kind of just see the normies in the audience nodding to themselves. Yes, we are the enlightened few who know better, but everybody else is just that stupid and vapid. And that just upset me that the movie was pandering to that mentality. And I think that's absolutely what it is.
Do you think it's that? I don't know, because I didn't feel it when I was watching it.
Like the entire thing just like everybody is so shallow and focused on appearances and stupid, except for like one or two point of view characters. Like even Glinda in the end becomes much more self-aware than she was in the beginning, right?
Yeah, and I can kind of see that, but I don't know. I didn't feel like it was like poking at the audience and saying, or not poking at the audience, or like I don't know. It didn't feel like it was like the audience looking at it and be like, oh, we can kind of see through this. It was like you can kind of understand it a little bit, because those things do happen in real life. There is things like pretty privilege, or they were kind of like people are treated differently just kind of based on like appearance, based on like how they look, etc. and stuff like that. So I don't know. It's like highlighting that a little bit, and it's more on like the extreme end of it as opposed to I don't know, the audience kind of seeing through some of it, I would say.
I guess so. I just get a really arrogant vibe from it. Because I could just picture the kind of person who was nodding along at this, and some of them sat next to me in the theater. That was maybe it as well. I don't want to like moralize about it too much, right? But I just got a really creepy vibe of the entire thing, like in terms of who I was imagining this was pandering to. Anyway, it just felt weird. It didn't feel like all that tragic an ending. It just felt, I don't know. It just had a different connotation to me.
One kind of other thing that this kind of like ties back into the storytelling aspect of it is, and what you mentioned as well. So, well, like one thing that I did hear is that the second part of the play is usually the part that people don't actually like. From kind of what I've seen online, it's like the weaker part of the Wicked play, and I think you touched on how they were trying to bring us up to status quo, but didn't really add anything or add to the story like a good adaptation would, where they take from the source material and then kind of enrich it with additional details. But where do you kind of feel like this movie could have been elevated, or where do you feel like what parts do you think kind of could have sung a little bit better with a different idea, or like more added to it?
So I've not seen the musical. I've seen a few clips. I checked out a few clips on YouTube just because I was curious. And just watching the movie, both movies, it felt to me very much like I was looking at a stage, right? Like individual set pieces had been set up to look very stage play like, and that kind of tended to tie in with the musical and dance numbers. And I just feel like in a movie you can have bigger scale. And I imagine that scene where Elphaba interferes with the construction of the Yellow Brick Road is probably a lot more subdued in the musical, if it's there at all, I would imagine. So in some scenes they probably add to it, but there's other scenes where it just feels very close. And like, for instance, that scene that is set after the arrival of Dorothy in Munchkin Land, right? When the Wicked Witch of the East dies, and there's like a showdown between Glinda and Elphaba. That felt very much like I was watching like a scene from a stage play. In general, I think the movie was constrained by trying to recreate that aesthetic, and it all felt very small. It all felt very empty. And I think the way in which they could have added to it, like I'm sure like the Emerald City is much grander than it is in the stage play. It kind of has to be, especially things like what kind of place Oz is and how the animals fit into it and what the rule of the wizard is like and what kinds of people live in Oz and all of that. I felt like there was a missed opportunity to flesh that out a little bit, to basically say, okay, what have the people who put on the stage play wanted to put on stage the entire time but couldn't because it's a theater play, and what can we put on stage? And I felt like there was just not a lot of that. And as a result, Oz feels just a very small and artificial place.
So it's almost like an immersion thing, because I can agree with that. It's like what I always say about some of these movies that happen in these fantastical worlds, or these like space operas like Star Wars, etc. Is, can I see myself living in in that universe? And that's kind of why something like Harry Potter is so iconic, because you have things like the castle, Hogsmeade, etc., where people actually feel the immersion. They feel like they can be part of that world. And I think I can agree with you in that you don't really get that same level of immersion in this movie, in Wicked, or in this world at all. Like, you don't know what it would be like to be in the Emerald City. You don't know what it's like to kind of be even like when they're just in like the forest in the woods with like the Yellow Brick Road, and you've got like the animals that are trying to go underground, etc. Like, it doesn't, none of it really feels alive. Like, none of it really feels like substantial, like you could actually be there. So I do agree with you in that sense, where it just kind of almost does feel like a stage play, where it's just kind of like things that have been put together, but it doesn't really, I don't know, it doesn't really bring you into the world of what the author probably had in mind for it.
Absolutely does not feel lived in. And I think this could have been like, there will not be another chance to bring Oz to life if you ever wanted to do that, right? And I think it's very clear that the director did not want to. Like, that was not the goal. But I just feel like it's a missed opportunity, and I think the story itself has quite a few holes in it. And through things like backgrounds and just detail that would have been possible in this movie, I think that the story could have been upgraded in that area, and it just didn't.
Which one do we move on to next? We can talk about how lame the songs were.
So I think the first part, first of all, I don't mind a good musical. It's not my favorite thing, but I can appreciate when I see a good song and a good musical number. And the first one had a couple, right? Like this, the popular song, and what is it, Defying Gravity, and the one in the library as well. There's a whole bunch of set pieces where they not only have a catchy song, but like the choreography of it is kind of interesting, right? Like, I think one of my favorites in the first part was the popular song, where Glinda has this makeup kit that kind of folds out with mirrors and lights and all of that, and there's like a three-dimensional, like multi-level dance choreography and stuff like that. And then in the library there was one with kind of the rotating bookshelves and all of that, that at least looked interesting, even if I wasn't on board with the movie, but I could appreciate, okay, this is kind of fun. And this movie just had nothing of that, right? In the beginning, there's one dance number, and then they're again doing this thing where they fluidly move between dialogue and song and kind of sing like half a line or a couple of lines, and then go back to dialogue and then back to the song and then back to dialogue. And it does not work, I don't think. At least give me a catchy song that I can kind of appreciate. And there was just very little of that in the second part. And I don't know why Wicked is such a popular musical if it has so few catchy songs. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not the target audience for it, and I definitely am not. But I don't even see what people like about it. I guess unless it's all front loaded in the first half of the musical. I don't know.
From kind of discourse and dialogue, it does seem like the stage play is front loaded with all the good stuff, and I agree with you. I'm not a hater of musicals. I actually quite enjoy musicals overall. Things like Grease, etc., are all kind of classics to me. But this one, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, where there wasn't like really that like grand like set piece musical in this that you can kind of really take away and feel like it kind of meant something. And actually, what I would kind of add on top of that as well is that in the first movie, I felt like some of the songs had a little bit more weight to it in terms of like the story. I feel like in the first movie, and again, we kind of disagreed on like the kind of like the mold and politics in the first movie, but I kind of felt like because I was like invested and emotionally invested in the characters, that the musical numbers that then matched it had a little bit more of like an oomph to it, and like you kind of like felt it a little bit more, and you were kind of in tune with the songs a little bit more because I had that emotional connection with the songs. Whereas in this one, because I didn't care about the characters, didn't care about the story, I didn't care about anything, I just kind of didn't connect and kind of found it grating, the musical numbers in this, because I was kind of at a point where I just wanted the movie to end.
For me, there just wasn't anything that really caught me that thought that was catchy at all. And I was just kept wondering, like, this is one of the most successful musicals of all time. Like, and I fully accept that I don't appreciate musicals, right? Like, I don't have the background, but surely one of the most beloved musicals of all time, it should be a little bit more obvious what the appeal is. And with this, I was just missing it.
I think one of the biggest songs is that popular one. From like that's
Mhm.
one that I can recognize without having knowing anything about Wicked. It's just a song that I've just heard and can like hum along to a little bit.
And Defying Gravity is kind of catchy, and but there's maybe two or three in the entire musical, at least for me. I don't know. I think the really big flaw of this is basically this, like, really in the story by itself. Like, a large chunk of this movie is basically how it's not really about Elphaba all that much, right? Like, she doesn't really do all that much. She kind of vaguely opposes the wizard, but a lot of the emphasis and a lot of the character moments are there for Glinda and Fiero, right? Because in the first movie they made the choice to stick with the wizard because they didn't want to give up their status and their luxuries, and now they're kind of regretting it, but they don't really see a way out. And then Fiero kind of switches sides halfway through the second part. Any thoughts on that? How that all played out? Because that's really the bulk of this movie, right?
I mean, the Fury one you can kind of see coming from a mile off, kind of how they set it up and how it played out. I don't know if I agree with you that they didn't really give Elphaba anything, or there wasn't really like any like character moments. I think they just butchered her one big one of her becoming a little bit more cruel in a period of time after like her sister had passed. And I mean, I think she did kind of have like the moment where she opposed sort of the Oz's wish in this, and there's kind of like parts in this that actually don't really make sense as well, about like how they were like kind of constantly meeting up, and it didn't like, that's a whole other part that we'll kind of get to a little bit later. I felt actually kind of most compelled by Glinda's character in all of this, just in terms of who she was when we first met her, how she kind of evolved, changed some of her like ideologies and beliefs and stuff like that throughout the first movie, which then carried into the second movie, and how she kind of viewed the truth. I don't think there was like anything in here that was like really that compelling, or like really like that out of the box or unexpected, or I don't know, there was just like really nothing that you kind of don't see coming with these characters, really. So it doesn't really make it interesting. There's like bits there, but it's not really, there's no real like meat on the bones to any of like the kind of the character choices, decisions, or anything like that, because you just kind of like feel it's expected as opposed to earned or motivated by the actual character and how the character would be.
Like, one of the things I even liked in part one was how Glinda and Fiero are kind of very similar people in that they've always been popular. They've didn't really have to work for it. And they've always kind of coasted on that and never really had to make any tough choices, never really had to deal with any consequence of their choices. And now, by doing what they've always done, they're kind of ended up on the wrong side, and they are kind of conflicted about it, and it kind of drives them to do different things. Glinda is kind of is pretty much completely passive and tries to not support the wizard too much, but she also doesn't do anything to undermine him. And Fiero is actively undermining him, right? He's put in charge of tracking down Elphaba, and he sabotages his own efforts by simply claiming that he couldn't catch her. And he calls off the hunt quicker than he should, and he effectively lets her get away, right? And then they end up taking different paths where Fiero ends up actually defecting to the other side. The thing I didn't buy at all was the romance. I think they should have just kept it at a moral argument where he simply sides with Elphaba and supports her and gives up everything. He's always like all his status and all his riches and all of that. He has to walk away from that. That is his character moment. He then has to live kind of in the woods as an outlaw because he chose to do the right thing. And Glinda is kind of stuck in her golden cage because she's refusing to take a stance. So on paper, I kind of like all of that, right? The problem, I think, that like the devil is kind of in the details, and the thing that absolutely killed it for me was, like I said, the romance, because I did not see that coming at all, and I don't think it's justified. It's very quick, and it doesn't add anything to the story. It's really just the wish fulfillment of the ugly girl gets the pretty guy.
Are you saying it from the first movie or the second movie?
Well, in the second movie,
Because it's carried over from the first movie.
there's a little bit of it, right? But
Yeah.
in the second movie, there's not much that kind of indicates that he really wants to be with Elphaba. It happens very quickly.
I mean, I think that's kind of the case with like most things in this. But it's a 3 hour movie, that first one, so like my details on it is a little bit hazy. But like how I always imagined, well, how I remembered it was that there was like a spark there, or there was like something there. But in that, he kind of just like went to what he'd kind of always done in the first movie, or like what it was, was the expected choice for him to make in terms of like Glinda in that, and didn't really pursue what he really wanted in that first movie. So I don't know. I think the romance, whilst again not really like that well explored in the second movie, just kind of made sense and was just kind of was what it was.
It just felt really jarring to me. In the first movie, like I said, there's a little bit of an interaction there, but like there should have been just moments and facial expressions that should have made it clearer that he's no longer in love with Glinda, right? And doesn't actually want to be with her anymore. To just wrap up that part, I don't know. I saw what they were going for, and I felt like there were just a lot of details there that didn't quite make it sing. But there's also other stuff like just how the regime works, right? Like what exactly is expected of Glinda and Fiero. There's like little bits and pieces here where they show bad stuff, right? Like when they start putting into place travel restrictions, first for the animals and then for the Munchkins. And I think actually that was, I thought, the strongest scene in the entire movie, where everybody thought it would just hit the animals, and then for some very petty and personal reasons, right? So what happens is that this one guy who becomes the woodsman rejects Nessa, right? Like the Witch of the East. And in order to keep him from leaving, she puts in place travel restrictions for Munchkins. That prevents him from leaving the Emerald City. And I thought that was kind of one of the stronger pieces, where number one, it's this whole thing about first they came for this group and I didn't say anything, and then finally they came for me, and then there was nobody left to speak for me. And that is kind of what the Munchkins experience in this, right? Where they always thought it would hit somebody else, and then it hits them, and at that point, there's nobody left to help them or speak up for them. And it also happens for very personal and petty reasons, right? This isn't some grand machinery of the state. This is just like one governor who is power mad, right? And I thought that was the part where I said, yeah, okay, this feels like a real thing. You can imagine that happening in like World War II Europe or something like that. You know what I mean? Like where some military officer or some stooge of the regime is just abusing that power for personal gain, and that is not an accident. That is kind of built into the system. That was kind of the one part where I said, yeah, okay, this feels real. This feels like an actual place. But then there's other places where it just outright makes no sense, right? I mentioned one thing earlier where Madame Morrible and the wizard, and I'm not sure if Glinda is present at that point, decide if Elphaba is killed, that will kind of paint them as the heroes, and that will give them all the control they need, and that will kind of get rid of dissent. The wizard says at one point, if Elphaba dies, I will no longer have to blame the animals. And I'm just sitting there saying, blame them for what? Like even in the second movie, we've not seen anything related to why the wizard is in power, why he's a dictator, why the animals are being scapegoated, any of it, right?
That was like one thing that I remembered from the first movie that we discussed about like this whole animals and why they were being persecuted and why they were being sort of kind of outcasted. And I was like actively looking for it in the second movie as to, okay, what's the whole purpose of, the animals being sort of shunned, etc. And like the whole like grand plan is behind it, like what's the motivation behind it? And I couldn't see anything. I didn't find anything, and it was just like frustrating to watch because I was just kind of like scratching my head as to like what any of it actually meant and like why it was significant and why it would like was part of the story because you could have easily cut anything to do with animals and still had the same movie and not really have too much change in terms of like the outcome of the characters and some of the choices and decisions that were really made in this movie. So yeah, it was quite disappointing to kind of see that go not go nowhere, but to see it not really fleshed out and not really have a proper explanation as to why they were kind of at odds in this. And on top of that, it's just like the whole idea. Again, we kind of touched on earlier about like how the MLT didn't really feel alive. And to emphasize that even more was like just the way that Elphaba kind of came and went as she almost pleased, really, really and truthfully. I don't even know why she was like outcast. Actually, two things actually. One, the way that she just kind of like popped up in buildings and whatever, and like even got to a point where she met Oz without really having any security, like kind of to get through to really see him. She kind of just like flew to him. And two, like I don't really understand like the witch's powers in this and like what the power set was, and it just kind of felt like her being detained by like regular folk was a bit disappointing because I was like, aren't you a witch? Can you not like conjure up some magic or something like that to do anything? So like just any of that just didn't really make sense at all. So I agree on the animal part, and then just kind of on top of that, the whole like world of it and like how just like the characters just kept on interacting with each other in these different various settings. But I was like meant to fear for Elphaba in terms of like her security and why she needed to be outcast. I don't know. It didn't make sense to me.
And you might say that's not all of this is not really the point. All of this is about those three characters making choices and their friendship and them choosing to be on the right side or the wrong side and all of that. But I think that's kind of the problem, that because all of that is so flimsy and all of that is so ill-defined, and this is everything from the geography to the politics to what it is people believe about the animals to what exactly, how powerful exactly Elphaba is. All of that kind of feeds into the choices people make, and it gives them lack of context, right? Like what atrocities are Glinda and Fiyero complicit in exactly, right? We see, like in the beginning, we see the yellow brick road was built by indentured labor from the animals, right? It's certainly forced labor, right? And there's not a whole lot else, right? Like then like we have the travel restrictions, which is obviously draconian, but it does not feel like a police state. It does not feel like a dictatorship in that way, right? And so when characters like Fiyero and Glinda are kind of conflicted, it feels a lot like it feels quite hollow. It feels like what exactly is so awful about this? We get some answers, right? Like obviously the animals are being purged, but like in terms of the day-to-day, right? And that ties into Oz is not a real place. What is living in Oz like? What are people afraid of? What happens to people who disobey? What happened? You know what I mean? Like it's all kind of missing. And because of that, the stakes are missing. And I think that is really the key part that makes all of this kind of stumble, which is that at this point, like it kind of makes Fiyero and Glinda feel very immature and spoiled, because ultimately what they're just giving up is comfort, right? They can't be bothered to give up the luxuries, right, that they have, right? But without properly defined stakes and without clear consequences of what happens in either scenario, depending on what choice they make, it feels a little bit like they simply don't want to give up all the money. Yeah, I've seen stories like this, right, where like characters are trapped in a society that turns authoritarian, and a lot of the time they are trying to prevent some kind of greater atrocity, or they are trying to repair the system, or they're trying to contain it, or there's all sorts of ways in which somebody might say, I will not walk away, I will try to fix the system from within, or I will try to fight the system from within. But in order to make that compelling, you have to make it very clear what would happen if they weren't there, or what would happen if they make the wrong choice. And the lack of world building and the lack of context is really what makes this whole thing not as compelling as it should be. And I feel like it's not that hard. Like in a musical, I think you can show this with context and just offhand dialogue. And in the movie, they could have actually shown it to us. And actually, when we last week when we discussed Wizard of Oz, we kind of talked about how the Witch of the East was supposed to oppress the Munchkins, right? And that is why they were so happy when she died, when Dorothy arrived. And we never see them suffer. We never see them, we don't see minds being worked by Munchkins, right? We don't see the forced labor. We don't see the oppression. It all looks pretty bright and colorful and all of that. And that could be the point as well, that it all looks shiny and like a fairy tale, but underneath there's something more sinister, but we're also not seeing very much of that, right? So I think that is kind of why kind of the underpinning of it is so hollow.
Yeah, as you were kind of explaining that, all I could kind of think of was equilibrium. When you're kind of talking about the consequences of going against the regime and going against status quo, because I think that movie does a really good job of highlighting that.
And if you want to see an example of how this is done properly, watch Babylon 5, which is like a science fiction show from the 90s. It basically follows like different characters from different civilizations, all of which turn authoritarian in some way. And we see like these characters make those choices, and we see the trade-offs they make, and the way they compromise themselves, and the way they try to fight back, and the way they try to save people from the atrocity and whatever, from the evils of the regimes that they nominally work for and all of that. So it is not impossible. Like, this is not some out of the blue standard for what this could be. This is very much achievable in terms of storytelling. And the fact that they barely try. Like, there's like a handful of scenes, right? Like when Nessa starts signing these decrees, and this one guy who turns into the, like, is it Bok, right? Who kind of watches this and kind of sees kind of the path they're going down. There's the kind of thing I want to see more of. Like, if you are telling the story of how this whimsical fairy tale is really an authoritarian nightmare, shouldn't you depict the authoritarian nightmare? All right, switching gears a little bit. Like, one thing that was apparent to me as I was watching it was, I call it prequelitis, where like a prequel will be so in love with explaining stuff from the original that kind of displaces the actual story being told, right? So some of my favorite examples are the Star Wars Solo movie, where they spend all this time explaining every little thing, like where he got his vest and his blaster, and the fuzzy dice in the Millennium Falcon and all of that, right? And it's stuff that's not really important and doesn't really expand on any character or the world, or is very meaningful by itself. It's basically a type of member berry where you're just supposed to recognize it, and it's supposed to feel significant because it's a thing you recognize, but by itself it doesn't really contribute very much. And I think this movie does that in a few different places, where like for instance, the fact that Scarecrow and Tin Man are people we knew from the beginning of the story, and they are the way they are because of Elphaba. I just feel like it does not really add anything to her character, really, especially because it actively contradicts what we know about these characters, right? Like Scarecrow specifically, I think this is mostly in the book, which I've been reading recently, and not so much in the movie, I'm not sure now, but we actually know how he was made, and it like literally happened yesterday, right? In the original story. And just completely retconning that, I don't know, really contributes to very much.
Yeah, it's kind of quite loose on how it really like impacts her and like how she's kind of like invested in it. Like, say, like the Tin Man, for example, she's only kind of involved in that because she's trying to fix a mistake that her sister made in the first instance. But overall, in terms of sort of how we view Elphaba and how we kind of interpret her character, it doesn't really change much, and it doesn't really like impact much. And again, when you like think about the change in her character and how she becomes that little bit more cruel when she's sort of interacting with Dorothy, is all of this should really build the pieces towards that, and build the pieces towards how all the things that she tried to do that were positive, kind of almost like a no good deed goes unpunished type of thing, where she tried to do these good things and it turned on her, and she was made to be the bad guy in those situations, and then that sort of piece by piece made her who she was. And I feel like the movie tried to insert something like that in there, but not in an effective way where any of this really has meaning. And I think it's not a sin to try and tie some of those iconic characters and try to like retcon things to make it more tied to Elphaba's story here, because that's who the main character is and that's who we're focusing on. It's just the method and the way that you do it, and if you do it in a way that makes sense and that the audience feels for it and it really builds into her story. And I feel like it's just too loose of a connection for it to really be meaningful. And this is when I talk about earlier about like my confusion about the story and how it was playing out. This kind of adds to it, because as I'm watching it, I understand that it's meant to be tied to her character and what she's, the good things that she's trying to do. But as I'm watching it, it only feels like we're putting things in there that we're meant to know from the Wizard of Oz. It only feels like we need the Tin Man, and the Tin Man came from this place, and the Scarecrow came from this place, and it's like, okay, yeah, you get like a bit of backstory, and it's like nice, but like you said, it doesn't elevate anything. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't elevate anything to do with the story or the characters at all.
It doesn't matter that. So Tin Man is created because he breaks the heart of Nessa because he's actually in love with Glinda, right? And then she uses some magic on him to keep him from leaving. And because she's bad at magic, she instead destroys his heart. And when Elphaba kind of in the spur of the moment, because she's the better witch, tries to save it, she has to turn him into the Tin Man, right? So he doesn't need a heart, right? So does that elevate who the Tin Man was in the original? Because in the original, he doesn't have a heart and he never had one. And he did have one, right? It's a whole thing about how he became the Tin Man, right? Like maybe this is because I've been reading the book over the last couple of days just out of curiosity, and I think that goes into more detail than the movie. But then I think the book Wicked is a response to the book Wizard of Oz, I think. Not sure entirely. But basically the thing is he wants to be more human. And he's actually kind of interesting because he wants to be more human, but he realizes that he isn't, because he used to be human, but he essentially turned into a machine. And every time he is kind of faced with his lack of humanity, he kind of defers to Dorothy and the others because he recognizes that he doesn't have a heart anymore. You know what I mean? It's not just about the organ pumping blood, it's about the human heart, right? And stuff like that, right? And so does this retcon of why he doesn't have a heart and why he's a Tin Man, does that actually expand on anything? Does it actually improve that story? Because I don't think so.
It doesn't. And I mean, the fact that they went through the lengths to tie it into the Wizard of Oz, you would think that it's giving fans of the original movie a little bit more to kind of go off, or a little bit more meat to the stories of some of these characters. But it doesn't really. It don't really like say anything, and we don't really actually even spend that much time with the characters. Like once they've been transformed, like to the Tin Man, for example, he kind of then just disappears off the screen. So it's like, yeah, it's great that we got all this information, but it doesn't really, it didn't really lead anywhere, and we didn't really get like any, like, if you're going to change it and you're going to like adjust it a little bit, why then would they tie in so much of the Wizard of Oz and actually kind of make us see things? Because like to me, it wasn't necessary to have the Tin Man and to have the Scarecrow and to have all of those additional characters in here. I'm kind of just like here trying to piece it together. I'm just kind of almost as confused as you are in terms of what the purpose of all of it was and like why it needed to be in there.
See, what I kind of expected from this, right? Just having heard what Wicked is about, I would have expected that we see kind of the events of the original Wizard of Oz, but from the point of view of the witch, right? And that things look different from the point of view of the witch. Even like the whole thing about the slippers looks very different if we know where they come from, and if we kind of see her relationship with her sister before they became the witches of the West and East and all of that. Like that is the kind of thing I actually wanted more out of the movie. And we kind of see this, right? Where is it Glinda? Glinda is kind of in the closet while Dorothy is killing the witch, right? It's like there's a little bit of this stuff, but then there's so many scenes where it's just outright contradicted and it's just outright a different story. Even this whole hate mob that goes after the witch, where the Munchkins like are outright calling for blood, and the Tin Man has his axe out and all of that, right? It's just outright changing the events that happened, right? It's this weird mix. And I think the thing I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around is it's not simply a recontextualizing, it's not simply the origin story, but it's kind of just redoing the original story, but with a different slant and a different tone. And it's kind of weird. But at the same time, we spend so much time of explaining where stuff comes from, right? Like Tin Man and Scarecrow, I like the big ticket items. But then there's also the whole thing about the water. Like one of the things watching Wizard of Oz for the first time was the whole thing about the water and how that kills the witch. Comes completely out of nowhere. And I was kind of expecting this movie to kind of explain that a little bit, but it's like some common, like some member of the crowd just says it. Like her heart is so impure that pure water will kill her. And from that point out, everybody runs with it. At that point, it's just a fact, but it's just somebody saying it out loud. It's like this weird mix between completely reworking the story and explaining stuff that doesn't need to be explained and expanding on the lore in ways that don't make sense. It's weird.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was trying to, in my head, try and tie the person kind of spreading the misinformation about the water to kind of the Oz and his like grander control over everyone and controlling the narrative and controlling the pieces. And I'm trying to find something that kind of like sings and like meshes the two and like has like some type of like theme between the two of controlling information across major crime. I can't quite piece it together, but it seems like something could be there, but maybe I'm like reaching a little bit with that.
Yeah, you could imagine something where the water stuff is just a fact for some reason. And then the wizard propaganda is that water is what kills her and that is proof that she's evil. You know what I mean? Like that would be the propaganda angle, right? You take something that's true and then you twist it to prove a thing that like to prove the lie kind of thing. There's also another might be almost be a plot hole, but one thing that just outright contradicts the original story, like just while we're talking about things that are being changed. In the original, the Wicked Witch is very clearly the same people as her henchmen, right? All of her minions in the original movie have the green skin and the large noses and all of that. They're very clearly the same kind of people. And here, like the whole point of Wicked is that she's unique. Like the reason she's shunned and the reason people hate her is because nobody else is green. Is that not a plot hole? Is that not like an outright contradiction?
I mean, that would be like a massive contradiction, yeah, because she would be the one that like sticks out.
I'm just saying, just look at like if we take the movie Wizard of Oz as kind of the reference, like just watching that, I kind of had the impression that the people of the West just look like that, and then the Witch of the West, is from there, from the Kingdom of the West, and that is why she has the green skin and all of that, because all her henchmen look exactly the same way. That's the whole thing about a prequel. A prequel is meant to explain stuff and make it and expand it and make it make sense. And the more stuff this adds, the less it makes sense. Like the less it fits with the original, which is kind of a strange one. And I kind of understand that that's not originally the point. The original point was like I've just been reading up a little bit on what like the original author of the book was saying, and he basically wanted to explore the idea of if the world treats you as evil, do you at some point just become evil? And my question to you is that what happens with Elphaba?
No, yeah, like you already know like my thoughts on her character journey in this. The change is unwarranted, and I feel like you can see the theme of that. You can see like pieces of that or elements of that in the story that they're trying to tell, but it's not done in an effective way to really make you feel like she's really being shunned and she's really like trying to do all these good things, but because the propaganda, because like the message from Oz is so strongly against her, that she just eventually just kind of succumbs to it and decides to kind of give up and just become the villain anyways. And at no point did I feel that at all in the movie. She just kind of changed, and I was like, oh, we're being a little bit more cool now. I was like, okay, fair.
And she's not even that much cooler, right? Like the whole thing about her living up to the persona in the end is an act, right? In order to position Glinda as being the hero, so that people will accept her as the hero. But she's not actually become evil. She's not actually become cruel, right? She just acts like it because she like has a deal with Glinda that she will fake her own death and she will go down in history as the Wicked Witch, and Glinda will go down as the good. You know what I mean? Like like the two themes seem to kind of fight each other. Elphaba kind of stays noble throughout the entire thing, and the only reason she's viewed as evil is because she's ugly and because the propaganda points this out, right? Like the propaganda posters, all of that make her look very hideous, and then people just instantly snap to it, right? Like there's not a whole lot convincing that needs to happen for people to accept that she's evil and for them to accept that Glinda is good, right? And it's purely based on appearance. One of the themes that this is supposed to explore is terrorism as well. And the only people she really harms is like the guards, right? Like the actual soldiers. Like she does not really terrorize civilians all that much, right? Like it's not even like the classic freedom fighter thing of you're blowing up buildings and there's collateral damage and you know what I mean? And so you look evil to the people who are the collateral damage or whatever. Like that doesn't even happen either.
Is part of the problem here as well is that she's so much of an outcast. Like she kind of has like this like hideaway or whatever, where she's not really connected to society and connected to the people of Oz. You're not seeing her kind of like trying to maneuver in that space. And like again, the whole idea of what if you kind of say someone's evil to a point that they become evil. It's like, yeah, Oz is saying that, and I guess like the people are also saying it, but I don't know, you don't feel it because she's not around them and she's not among them. And because she's not among them, it's like she's just kind of, I don't know, outcast. And yeah, I don't know, like it's hard to like really feel and empathize with it when she's just kind of in her own space, in her own world, just kind of hidden away. And again, she just kind of comes and goes as she pleases to so many high level places like the governor's place or where Galinda's staying or to Oz and stuff like that. So I don't know, it just for me it kind of takes away from the element of having empathy for her.
I think what it is that there's not enough constraints on what Elphaba can do. She can just literally do anything the plot says, and because she has access to the Grimoire, which seemingly contains all the magic, and also there's not enough specifics to the wizard's plan, where it's not entirely clear. Like we've gone over this, how there's like nothing to the wizard in terms of his plan and his propaganda and his rhetoric and all of that. There's nothing he's really trying to convince the people of Oz about, and because of that, there's not much for Elphaba to oppose, right? In that sense, if there was propaganda about just what it is the animals do, and then Elphaba's actions make it look as if that is correct, like from a certain point of view, but we see it from her point of view, and so we know her true intentions and all of that. I think the fact that this entire thing is just so surface level and it's purely based on vibes, and you're supposed to get it. You're just supposed to get that Elphaba is good and that Glinda is, a vapid puppet who wants to be good but doesn't really know how to put in the work to do it. And we are just supposed to get that Oz is evil. You know what I mean? Like because of that, Elphaba's reputation and how she looks to the average people is not fleshed out nearly enough, and for that reason, why she's perceived as evil, other than how she looks. Like it remains at she looks evil, therefore she is, and that's the beginning and end of it.
No, I agree.
And I think this is what kills the story for me, at least. Like, I understand that this is a beloved story, and for 20 plus years, people have loved this. It's just, if you want to tell a story about how somebody becomes a villain because of how society treats them, then you have to actually show that, right? You have to, like, this is like the ultimate exercise in show, don't tell. The movie keeps telling us stuff, and we're just supposed to accept it based on how things look, but it's not showing us that path, right? And you could totally imagine one where Elphaba gets radicalized and she at some point stops caring about the people because that's stupid and they're just pawns of the wizard, and if she wants to win, she has to stop holding back or whatever. That could have been her journey, and you can see how somebody who thinks they're saving the world is actually turning into a villain, and it's because of how how the world has been treating her. Like occasionally we'll get movies about how characters are trying to be heroes even though the world doesn't want them to. This could have been that, right?
Yeah, I think having the kind of key turning point, if we're trying to show her trying to do all these good things, but kind of being rejected because of the way she looks and, because of the way people perceive her, you could have really had her sister's death really tie into that, where she's tried to do good for someone and still it wasn't enough, and they panicked and maybe did something that led to her sister being killed in that particular situation. And then at that point she's like, I've tried to do this, I've tried to do that, I've tried to do everything, and none of it's like kind of gone anywhere, and this is like the final straw where I've tried to do this and now my sister's died because of these actions. And then she then becomes like really like hardened by that. I think could have worked a little bit better than kind of what we got.
Yeah, and I think we've kind of belabored that point now, but it just I think that is kind of really the foundation of this entire story, and I think it just fails because of that, in my opinion. Shall we wrap it up?
Yeah, so Wicked for Good. Last thoughts.
Yeah, so I think this is just too superficial. It's too based on vibes. It does not do the legwork to actually convince me of the story. And even though I think it looks good, just visually, I think it's creative enough. It's nice to look at. And there were a bunch of places in this where I thought, I really want to like this. I really want Glinda to be this tragic person who's kind of trapped in this golden cage, and she tries to be a better person, but she can't. And by Elphaba's maybe self-destructive example, she's kind of been inspired to be better than she otherwise would have been. I totally get that that's what they're going for, and I totally get that's on paper that's what it is. There's just no meat on the skeleton at all, in my opinion. And so for that reason, all of these character moments kind of fell flat, and nothing felt earned, and nothing kind of rang true. So for that reason, that's an overall rating of "I told you so" out of 5.
I agree. Good to look at, visually great. But ultimately, it just didn't have enough of like a kind of solid narrative running throughout that I could really buy into. I agree, it's a little bit superficial in its approach. It does a lot of things where, and not to kind of over repeat ourselves, but it does a lot of things where it's just kind of showing you stuff that for the sake of showing you stuff that as opposed to like it really meaning anything and really elevating any of the narrative or the story or anything like that. They nerfed Glinda's funny factor in this movie as well. She was hilarious in the first movie, less so in this movie, and had a lot less charm compared to the first movie, which was a big positive that I had from the first movie. Overall, I was just like disengaged, and by a certain point, I was kind of finding myself really hating the music and really hating the movie overall and wanting it to end. And hate's a strong word, so maybe not hate, but really disliking. So, with that said, I would give this one a 3 out of 10. And with that, I guess we reached the end of today's episode. If you reached this part of the episode, as always, we appreciate you pressing play. We appreciate you giving us a listen. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast. See you later.
Bye bye.